Maria Rodriguez wakes up to find her bank account frozen. 30 years of savings. Gone. Not stolen. Not spent. Simply inaccessible. The government has decided that her money is now their solution. Within months, the peso loses 70% of its value. Her retirement fund, worth enough to live on for 20 years, can now buy 3 months of groceries. She did everything right. Worked hard. Saved responsibly. Trusted the system. And the system destroyed her. This exact scenario has played out in Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Greece, Lebanon. Different decades. Different governments. Same result. Millions of people wake up to discover that everything they thought was wealth was actually just permission from a system that can revoke it any time. But in every single one of these collapses, 5 assets survived. This is the elite economics, where history reveals what actually protects you when systems fail. Question: if banks froze tomorrow, what would you actually own? Comment below. This will get interesting. Right now, you probably think you know what wealth is. Check your banking app. That number on the screen? That's not money. That's a promise. A promise that the bank will give you money if you ask. A promise that the money will be worth something if you spend it. A promise that the system allowing this transaction will still exist tomorrow. And promises break. Your retirement account isn't wealth. It's shares in companies you don't control, priced in a currency you don't issue, held by institutions you don't own. Your home equity isn't wealth. It's a number based on what someone else might pay, financed by a bank that actually holds the title, valued in dollars that can be printed infinitely. Look at what happened when these promises broke. In 1923 Germany, people with million-mark savings accounts couldn't buy bread. In 2001 Argentina, ATMs shut down and savings vanished behind bank barriers. In 2008 Iceland, an entire nation's wealth evaporated when 3 banks collapsed. The people who survived weren't the ones with the biggest numbers on screens. They were the ones who understood the difference between paper promises and real assets. Let me show you what real actually means. When everything else fails, gold remains. Not because it's magical. Because it's real. In 1923, the Weimar Republic printed money so fast that prices doubled every few days. Workers demanded to be paid twice daily so they could buy food before their wages became worthless. A wheelbarrow full of cash couldn't buy what a single gold coin could. That gold coin bought an entire city apartment. Because while the paper multiplied, the gold stayed scarce. The government could print marks. They couldn't print gold. Jump to Zimbabwe, 2008. The government printed a $100 trillion bill. 100 trillion. It couldn't buy a loaf of bread. But a single gold Krugerrand? That could be walked across the border to Botswana and exchanged for months of living expenses. The gold didn't gain value. Everything around it lost meaning. Here's what makes gold survive every collapse. Governments can't create it by typing numbers into computers. It takes real energy, real labor, real resources to pull from the ground. It's recognized everywhere. You can't take stocks or bonds or retirement accounts across a border. But gold? Gold speaks every language. It's portable. Tens of thousands of dollars of value fit in your pocket. And critically, it's no one else's liability. A bar of gold doesn't depend on a company staying profitable, a government keeping promises, or a bank staying solvent. It exists. It's yours. And when the paper burns, as it always eventually does, gold remains in your hand, real and tradable and valuable. The Soviet Union collapses. 70 years of communist rule end almost overnight. The ruble becomes toilet paper. Store shelves empty within days. Supply chains that fed 300 million people simply stop functioning. In Moscow, people face real starvation. But outside the cities, something different happens. Russians with dachas, small garden plots, survive. These weren't farms. Most were just 600 square meters. A large backyard. But that backyard grew potatoes, carrots, onions, tomatoes. It wasn't about profit. It was about food. And when the system collapsed, those tiny plots produced more real wealth than any amount of rubles in a bank account. By 1993, these small plots produced 90% of Russia's potatoes and 70% of its vegetables. Families that would have starved were fed by land the size of a tennis court. Argentina 2001 tells the same story. When the peso crashed and unemployment hit 25%, families with small productive plots had food while neighbors went hungry. They had surplus to trade when currency meant nothing. Here's what matters. Speculative land you buy hoping to sell higher, collapses with the system. It's just another paper asset. Productive land that grows food or raises animals, keeps producing regardless of what's happening with banks or governments or currencies. An apple tree doesn't care about inflation rates. A vegetable garden doesn't need a functioning stock market. Productive land is independence. And when dependence on fragile systems becomes dangerous, independence becomes priceless. It's wealth you can eat. Post-war Germany, 1946. The Reichsmark is worthless. Cities are destroyed. The government barely functions. But walk through any bombed-out neighborhood and you'll find people working. A plumber fixing pipes. An electrician restoring power. A carpenter rebuilding homes. They're not being paid in currency because currency is meaningless. They're being paid in food, in shelter, in other services. Their skills are the currency. Fast forward to Venezuela today. A doctor with 15 years of training earns $20 per month. $20. That's not a salary. That's an insult. But that same doctor who crosses into Colombia? She's earning a living wage within weeks. Her skills gave her portability when paper wealth couldn't. Here's the brutal filter that collapse applies. Does your skill solve a real problem people face regardless of the economic system? If you're a social media manager, a financial advisor, a marketing consultant, your expertise depends entirely on a functioning modern economy. When that economy breaks, your skill becomes worthless overnight. But if you can fix engines, treat injuries, grow food, purify water, build shelter, generate power, those skills hold value under any system, any government, any conditions. Because they solve problems that don't disappear when currencies collapse. Skills are the only asset that travels with you, can't be confiscated, and actually appreciate during collapse. Germany, 1945. The official currency is near worthless. But American soldiers carry something more valuable than dollars. Cigarettes. A carton of cigarettes buys a camera. A handful buys dinner. 2 cartons buy a week's rent. Why? Because cigarettes are scarce, portable, divisible, don't spoil, and people want them. They function as currency better than actual currency. This is the power of essential commodities during collapse. They hold inherent value when paper doesn't. Argentina's collapse saw families who stockpiled basics, rice, cooking oil, batteries, soap, become wealthy relative to their neighbors. Not because these items increased in value, but because currency decreased to nothing. A bottle of cooking oil could be traded for car repairs. A bag of rice for medical treatment. The commodity had utility. The peso had only broken promises. Zimbabwe during hyperinflation made fuel more valuable than gold. A tank of gasoline meant transportation, power, escape. People traded jewelry for jerry cans of fuel. The lesson repeats across history. Store what people need to survive. Not luxuries. Not collectibles. Food that doesn't spoil. Water purification tablets. Medical supplies. Batteries. Fuel. Tools. These aren't speculative investments. They're insurance that pays out exactly when you need it most. When currency fails, essentials become currency. Greece, 2015. Banks limit withdrawals to €60 per day. The economy is frozen. But in small towns across the country, a different economy emerges. The doctor treats the farmer's child. The farmer gives the doctor vegetables. The mechanic fixes the teacher's car. The teacher tutors the mechanic's daughter. No euros change hands because euros are trapped in banks. But life continues because trust hasn't collapsed. Every economic collapse in history produces underground economies. Not criminal enterprises. Survival networks. People trading skills and goods based on relationships, not currency. The isolated family with gold buried in the backyard is vulnerable. They can't do everything themselves. But the family embedded in a network of trusted, capable people? They have access to skills, resources, and support that no amount of individual wealth can buy. When institutions fail, communities survive. Social capital becomes the most liquid asset you own. Because currency is just formalized trust. And when formal systems break, informal trust is all that remains. See the pattern? Every asset that survives has one thing in common. It's real. Physical gold you can hold. Land that produces food. Skills in your hands and mind. Commodities with inherent utility. Relationships built on trust and reciprocity. None require the system to continue functioning. None depend on governments keeping promises or banks staying solvent. They exist independent of paper, politics, and permission. And every time currencies collapse, every time governments fail, every time banking systems freeze, these five assets protect their owners while paper wealth evaporates. This isn't theory. This is the repeated lesson of history, tested across continents and centuries. Reality doesn't care about your portfolio statements. You're watching this for a reason. Some part of you knows the system is fragile. That the promises might break. That this time might not be different. So here's your choice. Keep hoping paper holds value, or start building real wealth. The people who survive collapses aren't lucky. They're prepared. Not paranoid. Just students of history. And history is screaming at us right now. If this changed how you see wealth, subscribe. The Elite Economics shows you what the past teaches about protecting your future. Because the pattern always repeats. The only question is whether you'll recognize it in time. Thanks for watching.